What's going on, everyone? I'm back, and Monday morning, I'm coming at you a little bit earlier with my waiver wire top pickup list for week 10. Now, I know I wasn't able to come out with my list last week, so to make up for it, I'm coming at you with my top 20 players for this upcoming week to target. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. So starting with quarterbacks, I actually think that in Week 10 there are some really quality matchups for quarterbacks, especially for some streamable guys that are probably available on your waiver wire. So let's get right into it if you are hurting at that position. My first guy that I'm looking at is Matthew Stafford going up against the Browns. Now obviously it's still Monday morning. Stafford and the Lions haven't played the Packers tonight yet, but regardless of that outcome, the Lions are going to be at home versus the Browns, who have been, favorable matchups offensively, defensively for pretty much everyone in this league so far. And I don't expect that to change. The Lions are a pass-first team. I expect Matthew Stafford to have a big game, and I expect him to go for at least 200 or 300 yards passing in this game. Next, another favorable matchup quarterback, Big Ben. And I know the Steelers didn't even play this week. They're going to be coming off a bye. But if anything, that helps them. They've had an extra week to prepare for the Indianapolis Colts. I know the game is in Indy. That doesn't really make much of a difference. The Colts, they're a bad football team. Don't let the win versus the Texans make you think otherwise. That was without Deshaun Watson. That Texans team is not the same without him. And still, even with that being said, the Colts were barely able to get the win. So I fully expect Big Ben, even if it's on the road after a bye week in this favorable matchup, to be able to come out and put up a decent amount of points for you. Again, if you're hurting at that quarterback position, a really viable name to target, probably available on the waivers. So go ahead and try and put in a request for him. Next on my list of quarterbacks, probably a name that hasn't come up too often, but Eli Manning. Now, obviously, the Giants, they got whooped by the Rams, and that's a nice way to put it. He still did, however, have 220 yards, 2 touchdowns, now 1 interception, but here's the bright side. The Giants are going to be playing the 49ers next week, and all I have to say is, look what they did, the 49ers that is, versus the Cardinals and Stanton. They made a below-average quarterback look somewhat decent, and I think Eli Manning is going to be in for a big game. The 49ers are weak all around defensively. They're weak against the pass, they're weak against the rush, so I could see the Giants offense having a big game, and obviously Eli is going to be instrumental in that. So go ahead. I think this is a great week to play Eli versus a weak 49ers team. Continuing on, a name at quarterback that's been getting, hotter and hotter in terms of pickups, Josh McCown of the Jets. Jets obviously have been playing a lot better than we thought. Josh McCown has been playing steadier football, big reason why. In his win versus the Bills, he had 140 yards passing, 1 passing touchdown, and then a rushing touchdown. Now obviously those weren't that impressive numbers. The running game a little bit dominated in that performance, but I will say he's going to be going up against the Bucs, and potentially the Bucs will not have Jameis Winston available. And we've seen what that Bucs team is without Jameis Winston. They suffer on all parts of the team, offense and defense. And I think it's going to be more of the same. If Winston doesn't play, it's going to be Fitzpatrick at the helm. And I think the Jets are going to be able to take advantage of that. They're going to be able to tire out that opposing defense. And I think Josh McCown is going to be in for a nice performance that weekend. Continuing the long list of quarterbacks, next I've got Jared Goff versus the Texans. And maybe Goff isn't available in your leagues, but in the rare case that he is, I would say go ahead, scoop him up, coming off a big performance, 311 yards, 4 touchdowns in the blowout victory versus the Giants. And if anything, I always say this, after a big performance like that, you can treat this guy, whoever the player may be, as a trade target, see what their value is. But regardless, trade value aside, the Rams are going to have the Texans, and again, we saw what the Texans team is without Deshaun Watson. They're just not the same team. I fully expect the Rams to be able to put up 30 points against this team, no problem. The Colts were able to put up 20, so I think the Rams are a much better team. They're going to get some help from their defense. Goff does a really good job of distributing the football. So again, I think the Rams are a sneaky team to have a big game offensively and defensively this upcoming week. Almost through with the list of quarterbacks. Next, I have got Tyrod Taylor going up against the Saints. And if you look at his last game versus the Jets, I know a lot of those points were in garbage time. He ended up having 285 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. And I will say, though, he did that without Kelvin Benjamin. I fully expect Benjamin to be playing in this next game. He's familiar with the Saints. I think that'll be a boost to help that offense in Buffalo. So I expect Tyrod Taylor to have another serviceable game. The Saints defense is improved, but I think it can be taken advantage of at the same time. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, some garbage time points, because that's what really saved Tyrod's week this last week. So go ahead, try and put in a waiver request for him if still available. And finally, rounding off my list of guys, I've got Teddy Bridgewater. And I know I've talked about him before in terms of guys to add, but now we're really getting close to that point of time he'll probably be inserted in the games, if not this week, maybe next week. So I would say things that I'm hearing from Minnesota is that he's looked really good in practice, looking like his old self a little bit, and he's a favorite to come out and regain the job once he is healthy and available. Next, moving on to wide receivers, the first guy that I want to mention is Terrance Williams of the Cowboys. Last night had a huge game, 9 catches for 141 yards versus the Chiefs. And not only did he have a huge performance, but as far as moving on next week, we saw, more importantly, Dez Bryant get hurt, what looked like to be an ankle injury. And with Bryant out, Williams becomes even that more of an important option in that Dallas offense. They're going to be going up against the Falcons, and I think what will probably be a high-scoring affair. The Cowboys are going to need every single piece of offense they could use, and especially if Zeke is out, they might rely on the pass game even more. So look for Terrance Williams to be a nice add for this week. Maybe a little bit speculative, but will definitely pay off if Dez Bryant goes out. Next on my list of wide receivers, I've got Brendan LaFell of the Bengals. And the main reason here is we all saw what happened with AJ Green and Jalen Ramsey. The takedown, the couple of hits by Green, they look pretty bad. Both were ejected, and I wouldn't be surprised if AJ Green is suspended for this next upcoming week. And that's why Brendan LaFell should be a target for all of you AJ Green owners or otherwise. Now, he did finish only with 2 receptions and 28 yards, but Andy Dalton only had 10 completed passes, so keep that in mind. I will say, however, that LaFell has come up big before in games that AJ wasn't present, games where Eifert wasn't present. Look to last year, towards the end of the season, LaFell had some big games, and I'm expecting something similar. The games versus the Titans, not a horrible matchup, and I think that LaFell is going to be the #1 target on that team passing-wise. Continuing on, a name that I want to talk about, Robert Woods. He had a huge game, 4 receptions, 70 yards, 2 touchdowns. And granted, the main performance came from those 2 big touchdowns, but I will say, if anything, if you can pick him up if he's available, he can be, again, that trade piece, kind of get value from him after a big week. And I will say, in addition, Goff looked really good, and now they're going up against the Texans. They can be beat defensively. I think Woods is becoming the #1 guy in the offense for the Rams, kind of usurping Sammy Watkins. And Sammy Watkins did have 1 big catch for a touchdown, but that was about it. So I like Robert Woods versus the Texans defense to potentially, in the passing game, have another big day. And finally, in the wide receiver category, Robby Anderson of the Jets. We've been talking about him quite a lot, and recently put up another touchdown, 4 receptions, 48 yards, and a touchdown versus the Buffalo Bills. Didn't have maybe the yardage or the reception count, but he did have another touchdown. That's multiple games, back-to-back touchdowns. And again, the Jets get the lonely Tampa Bay Buccaneers, probably going to be without Jameis Winston. So I think that helps everyone on that Jets offense, especially Robby Anderson, who I think it's pretty clear is becoming the favorite target, if not already, of Josh McCown. Now moving on to the list of running backs. First guy that I want to talk is Darkwa of the Giants. Now versus the Rams, it was tough sledding for the Giants all around, but Darkwa still did manage to get 16 carries, 71 yards, and I'm pretty convinced that he would have gotten more if it didn't become such a blowout at the end for that game. So I would say now the Giants going up against the San Francisco 49ers, we saw what Adrian Peterson did to them, and I think Dark was the main guy in that backfield for the Giants. There's no reason why the Giants running back can't do the same. If anything, I can see him at least getting 100 yards. Hopefully he can get in the end zone as well, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Giants lean on the running game to take a little bit of pressure off of Eli, even though I do think Eli will have a great game as well. And finally, the last name on the short list of running backs, Damien Williams of the Dolphins. Now, both running backs had pretty decent games last night, Drake and Williams, but I'm guessing, at least from what I've seen, Williams is the guy that's more readily available on the waiver wires. Probably wasn't as high of a priority from last week being picked up. He had 6 catches for 47 yards and a touchdown. In terms of the receiving game, I think he's the main option. Now, I know Drake had the same amount of receptions, but Williams did look like the better pass catcher to me. As far as rushing attempts, Williams was outgained by 2 when in comparison to Kenyon Drake. And I will say this week going up against the Carolina Panthers, if you look what the Panthers did to the Falcons, you know, they did a really good job of limiting Devonta Freeman, and then they gave up some more big plays to Tavon Coleman. And Williams reminds me of Tavon Coleman, that relief back that kind of gets more involved in the passing game, and I think those kind of backs are more successful versus the Panthers. That's why I really like Williams this week, especially if you're hurting at that running back position, maybe as a running back 2 or a flex guy that will get some targets out of the backfield and potentially get in for a short touchdown. Now, moving on to tight ends, the first guy that I want to mention, Vernon Davis, probably was a hot waiver wire guy last week, but I will say this week if he's available still, try and go get him, especially if Reed is still out. He had 6 receptions for 72 yards versus a stingy Seattle defense, and was clearly Cousins' favorite target, and I think that can be the same case when the Redskins go up against the Minnesota Vikings, a similar stingy defense, and if Reed is gone, that security blanket, Vernon Davis becomes a nice guy to go after if you are hurting at that tight end spot. Next, I want to talk Greg Olsen, because this is a guy that got injured really early in the season for the Panthers, and we've kind of forgotten about him. Maybe he's still on the waiver wire for you guys, and if not, I would say check into that, because he is pretty much 2 weeks away from coming back to that Panthers offense, and I can tell you the Panthers desperately need him, and Cam Newton is going to be in for a great addition offensively when Olsen returns. I think without Kevin Benjamin, he is unquestionably the #1 passing option on that offense. I think he'll receive plenty of targets, and if available, go ahead, put in a waiver request for him. You'll have to wait 2 more weeks for him to probably be available, but it's worth it. He becomes a top 5 tight end when he returns to Carolina and is healthy. And finally, the last guy that I want to talk, probably not a lot of people are mentioning his name, but Adam Shaheen of the Bears. And look, we all know what happened with the horrible Miller injury for the Bears, that dislocated knee, and obviously someone is going to have to step in and fill that role. Well, enter Adam Shaheen. He was a high draft pick for the Bears, and now's the perfect time for him to come in and become involved in that offense. He's familiar with Trubisky, both in the same draft class. Hopefully that chemistry is going to be apparent, and Shaheen will be able to step into that role. A speculative ad, but still a guy that could potentially come in and be a serviceable option in the Bears' pass offense. Now, finally making our way to defenses for a true waiver wire video. I've got a couple to name. First, the Lions defense. I mentioned it before. Lions get a really nice matchup versus the Browns. The Browns are a mess, still winless, and the Lions, they're going to be at home, and I think that they're going to wear down the Browns on all fronts, and they'll be a very nice fantasy option in terms of defenses this week. The Browns don't have anyone that scares opposing teams, so this should be a decent performance from the Lions. Next, I'm looking at a similar situation, Steelers at the Colts, and look, In this situation, Steelers, again, I mentioned it, they've had extra time to prepare, and even if Big Ben struggles offensively, I think that defense is going to show up. That Colts offense just doesn't scare anyone. I know T.Y. Hilton had a big game versus the Texans, but it was on two huge plays pretty much where he got the majority of his points. One was about a 50-yard touchdown, and the other was that failed tackle on the 80-yard touchdown run by T.Y. Hilton. So keep that in mind. I don't think T.Y. is going to have the same success versus the Steelers, and I think they're a much more disciplined team than Houston. So altogether, to me, that spells a big performance again for the Steelers in this friendly matchup. Next, I've got the Rams versus the Texans. And again, you saw what the Rams did versus the Giants. I think this is going to be a similar kind of situation because the Texans are even worse offensively than the Giants. Now, I know they might have some big guys in terms of the receiver position with Hopkins and Fuller, but look, that makes no difference if you've got Tom Savage throwing you the ball. You know, he had them in a chance to win, but he's by no means the same guy as Deshaun Watson. He doesn't have the same threat as a runner. And that Rams defense, it's stingy. You got that front seven with Donald. He's the best to do it in that defensive line. And so I really like the Rams matchup versus the Texans. I expect them to force a lot of turnovers and to make it a long day for Savage. And finally, a defense that probably is going to be going under the radar of a little bit. I will say the Bears defense versus the Packers. Now, obviously the Packers have yet to play this week, but regardless, this Bears defense has been underrated and overperforming all of this year. They have good pieces on that defense. This game, divisional game, Bears-Packers, they're always ugly slugfests. And without Rodgers, I think this is going to be a low-scoring affair in Chicago. It's probably going to be one of the classic cold games, mid-November. So I look for the Bears to capitalize on that, to hold the Packers in terms of points, and to put together a solid performance defensively with at least one or if not more turnovers. So with that being said, that concludes my list of top 20 guys to add for this upcoming week. Let me know, what did you guys think? Do you agree with my picks? Let me know if you have any questions. As always, hit me up in the comments. And if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.